I'm going to start this with what I'm calling opening prayer. It's a little bit different than probably most opening prayers you are used to. So give me a minute here.
See
I chose this as our opening prayer because, well, first of all, the song is awesome. That's beyond the shadow of a doubt. But I think there's a lot of metaphors about our relationship with God when you're watching pair of skaters like that, and especially world-class ones. You know, she fell. That was a big mega contest, you know. She fell, and she gets up, and she continues. When Morgan, he's the guy, when he will toss her up like in the air, you know, she lets herself just fall onto him. And is that not sort of how, that's my image of God, that God catches us when we need God to catch us, that God cares for us, and he's always going to catch us, no matter what it is that he asks us to do, which we know is really, really hard, whatever it is that he's asked us to do. But God will be there and have our back. You know, in ice skating, usually you can hear the blades on the ice, you know, when they're skating. Well, of course you couldn't in this because I muted that. You were listening to a different song. And, but, you know, I also think that's a little bit something about God too, because I think that's how God comes to us. God does come to us in the quietness of our heart. And that's where we usually find God. And the other thing is, when I watch skaters like that, I'm literally in awe. I can't walk across a room without tripping on my own feet. And look at what these two people do. What trust they have in each other, the way we should trust our God. How hard they have worked to get to this place. Guess what? To have a good relationship with God is a lot of hard work. So I chose that to be our opening prayer rather than sort of a traditional prayer. So I hope that was okay by you. Also, I think the key to mental and spiritual health, it does lie in our relationships, in our ability to appreciate beauty, and in our ability to trust. So that's what we need to explore while we're talking about anxiety in this particular workshop. So the first thing you need to know is anxiety is normal. Everybody feels anxious at various points in their life. That's actually a really good thing. It's not necessarily a negative emotion. In fact, small amounts of anxiety have actually probably allowed our species to survive. So I want you to imagine that you're a caveman or a cavewoman. It's end of summer. Now you know there's a lot you have to do to prepare for winter. You're going to have to prepare skins. You know, first of all, you got to catch those animals, then you have to skin them, and then you're going to have to prepare those skins. You need them for clothes, you need them for shelter. You need to start collecting some grains and some tubers. You're going to have to put them in the cave for the winter when you can't get fresh food. So, you know, there's a lot that you got to do. So imagine you don't feel anxious about this at all. In fact, it's a lovely summer day. And maybe you would rather just like to lie on a rock and kind of soak in the rays. You know, that would sound like a lot more pleasant than skinning animals or going out and doing hard work like hunting for food to put away in a cave for this activity that's coming sometime in the future. Well, I have a sneaky suspicion that if you felt no anxiety, you might not have a very good outcome that winter if you didn't follow up on that task. So anxiety in us human beings keeps us on task. So imagine deadlines. Deadlines always make people anxious. Most of us are procrastinators. We don't do what we're supposed to do right away. We wait too long, and then we're all really anxious because now we get this deadline looming over us. And we feel a lot of anxiety around that, but then we nose to the grindstone, we get it done. So imagine you felt no anxiety. It's a deadline. You know, let tomorrow take care of tomorrow. No problem. Well, if it's a deadline for your work, you might lose your job. You lose your job, you might lose your house. Maybe you won't be able to feed your children. Everybody will die. Better to feel a little anxiety. That would be much better for you. However, when anxiety is produced too often and without any reasonable cause, like such a deadline or facing an event that you need to prepare for, then your anxiety may actually be an anxiety disorder. So in this country, 1 out of 14 people in America have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. That's 7% of our population. That's 23 million people. And it costs us $42 billion every year to treat anxiety. So I think it might be good if we can work on other strategies to help us handle anxiety. And these are strategies that can be for any kind of anxiety, the small kind that we all have periodically, but also for those who have an anxiety disorder. And they need to develop strategies to help them. There's medication, there's therapy, there's a lot of things that they will get, which is really important. But there are some strategies that really can help them just survive this. So first, I want to just tell you about a couple of kinds of anxiety disorders. The first one is called generalized anxiety disorder. That kind of sounds like they don't know what it is. It's characterized by worrying about everyday things in an excessive, persistent, and unrealistic manner, and it may lead to obsessive behavior. So let's say you had generalized anxiety disorder, and you are just obsessed with whether or not you left the stove on. So you're constantly going back and checking the stove. And it's just so overwhelming to you, this fear that you have left this stove on, that eventually that kind of a thought can invade your whole being and make it impossible for you just to live a normal life. That would be pretty awful. And this is a disease. That particular kind of anxiety affects more women than men. And when you have that kind of anxiety, it can become completely overwhelming. And somebody who's suffering from generalized anxiety disorder probably has a lot of restlessness. It finds it very difficult to concentrate. They find it hard to make decisions. They have a lot of body tension and pains. If you're always like this, it's going to hurt. They're probably irritable, and they probably don't sleep well. So the sad thing is when your anxiety has reached a very unhealthy level, then panic can set in, and that's a whole nother disorder. And is crippling. So another kind of anxiety that people suffer from is social anxiety. And this is social anxiety disorder occurs when, it's normal for human beings to want to interact with other human beings. And so everybody kind of wants to be able to function socially, but just the thought of having to deal with other people creates overwhelming fear and distress. I have a son-in-law who suffers from social anxiety, and it's even difficult for him to go out of the house because he's going to meet people who then might want to talk to him, and that is just creates an overwhelming fear for him. Usually these people who have this, they feel very embarrassed, they have a lot of self-consciousness, and they really expect to always be judged and criticized. That's one of their major fears, that they're going to go out, they're going to say something stupid, people will think they're dumb, people will laugh at them, so on and so forth. So this disease actually affects more men than women. So if you have anxiety disorders, you're probably feeling panic and fear. You worry about things that have not happened. You worry about things that could have happened even after a situation is resolved. That maybe, you should have felt kind of panicky about, but now it's over with, and now you are now obsessing about, but that could have been this, and it could have been that, and this is not healthy. An inability to fall asleep or to stay asleep, that you actually can feel numb. Your body will feel numb. Shortness of breath, heart palpitations, panic attacks, and actually physical illnesses brought on by chronic stress. So it's serious. It's serious when you have an anxiety disorder. So now I want to talk about a panic attack, because a panic disorder is like the creme de la creme of awfulness. It's an extreme physiological response to anxiety. So here's something that could be going on, this would be sort of like an internal dialogue you'll be having with yourself as you feel a panic attack coming on. Come on, you can do this. It's only a meeting, just hold it together. Oh God, I can feel the wave coming. Not now, please, not now. My heart's beating too fast. It's going to explode. This isn't right. Why can't I catch my breath? I'm suffocating. My muscles feel heavy. My tongue is frozen. I can't think straight. Am I going to faint? I have to get out of here. I can't stay. That would be kind of a pretty typical scenario of a person who apparently has great fear of going into this meeting that she's supposed to be going into. So, but all that's going on in her head. This is all in her head. It's her brain that is reacting to some kind of a stimuli that we don't really understand what it is. And a panic attack, somebody described it as terror injected into your brain. And so it's like having liquid terror injected into your brain, an overwhelming feeling that something's very wrong and you are helpless to stop it. Now your brain is looking for a cause, but there's none to be found. And so it's just like your whole brain is on overload, and it's painful. Common symptoms, physical symptoms of a panic attack: rapid heartbeat, feeling as though you can't breathe, sweating, dry mouth, dizziness, nausea, and stiff muscles. It's painful. So during an attack, it's common, the fear you have during a panic attack is usually one of two things. I'm going to die, that's very common, or I'm going crazy. Those two things are your like mega fears when you're in the middle of a panic attack. Many people believe they're actually having a heart attack or stroke. I can tell you that in every emergency room in this city, people go in thinking they're having a heart attack and they're diagnosed as having a panic attack. And that probably happens just about on a daily basis. This is so common. And so this is the really horrible thing about panic attacks. They actually mimic these serious symptoms that you have to seek medical advice for, like a heart attack. So it just makes it really hard to deal with. So again, it's like what triggers one? And I'm sad to say that this really depends on a whole lot of factors. There's not like one cause. It could be something environmental, something in your environment. So for example, let's say you were on an airplane trip, and during that airplane trip, because this has happened to me, it hits like an air pocket and the whole thing just drops. And you're like sitting there in your seat and you're happy, and all of a sudden, you are terrified. However, the pilot had everything under control, so it was cool, though it didn't feel like that. Well, you know what? Your brain remembers that. It remembers that happened when you were in a plane, and it stores that information away, and it remembers how you felt at that moment, stores that information. The brain is really good at this stuff. So the next time that you need to go somewhere, you're heading to the airport and you're feeling quite anxious. And you could actually be so anxious that you actually develop a panic attack about it. And that's because your brain is a good learner and has learned that airplanes are dangerous. Dangerous things happen on airplanes, ergo, stay off airplanes. However, it's wrong. Your brain is wrong. So, it's something that you need to learn how to deal with, but that's the trigger. That's the trigger for the panic attack. It could be you're afraid of dogs, somebody who got bit. It could be that when you were a teenager, you weren't like the most popular girl on the planet, and going to social events were really pretty horrible things, and other young people can be really, really mean. So you've kind of grown up, your brain learned that parties are not like your favorite thing. Your brain learned that. And so now, when you know that you have to go to some kind of a social event where they're going to be strangers, your brain tells you, danger, danger, Will Robinson, danger. And it sets off a series of feelings. It drops adrenaline in you, does all these other things in your body, and you can have a panic attack. So the good news is you don't have to live with this. You don't have to be a slave to panic all of your life. So there are some techniques you can use that are very beneficial if you suffer from panic attacks. The first thing is see a doctor. Let a doctor actually make sure that you don't have a heart defect maybe. That actually it is panic attacks you're having and not symptoms of heart attacks. That would probably be a really good thing to find out. The doctor maybe you're going through a very stressful thing in your life. Somebody you love is ill and you're caring for them. Your child's flunking out of school. I'm trying to think of really terrible things that happened in my life. Not that one never happened. Anyway, and so when you describe to your doctor kind of like what your life is like, and the doctor will then realize, oh my God, we got to help this woman. And so they might put you on some short-term medicine. By the way, short-term is really important there. So it'd be diazepam, which is basically Valium, or Xanax, or Ativan. There's a whole bunch of them. And just kind of to help you through a bad period. So, but that is not something you want to be on forever. You don't want to become dependent on those drugs. So seeing a doctor, very important. The doctor can also decide maybe you have a fear or maybe you really are not functioning well and you actually should go see a therapist or a psychiatrist, and that doctor would help recommend that and help you get the help that you need. So always see a medical doctor, like your regular old, GP doctor. Here's the thing we all can do. You need to practice deep breathing. One of the things that happens, yes, bless you. One of the things that happens when you are having a panic attack is you start breathing real shallow, like, well, guess what? Now you're not getting any oxygen. You're like breathing so fast, the oxygen isn't getting into your system. So that causes a lot of those physiological symptoms that you have. And so what you want to do is stop that. So you need to learn how to first slow down your breathing. That's the first thing you can do when you know that you're heading into a panic attack, because you've had them before, so you know what they feel like, you know it's coming. Slow down your breathing. The technique I use, I breathe in through my nose, I breathe out with my mouth. So it doesn't mean that the panic attack might not happen, but it does mean that it might not be so severe and you won't have all the physical feelings that you were having. So deep breathing can work in a whole lot of situations. When you're really, really angry at somebody, deep breathing might stop you from going crazy and yelling at them and doing something really stupid. And so deep breathing is a great thing. It's great for pain. You're in terrible pain, and presumably it's not going to be forever. Take deep breaths, and sometimes you can just get through the pain and you will feel better. The other thing is, this is really hard. I never know how to explain this to people, but this is really, really hard. You have to accept that it's happening. When you're having a panic attack, what you want to do is stop it. You want to deny it. You don't want it to happen. You want to do everything you can to make sure that this thing doesn't actually happen to you. So what you need to do is not do that. You need to allow it to happen. And the good thing about letting it happen is it'd probably be more short-lived than if you fight it, because you're not going to stop it. It's going to happen. Your brain is already dumping chemicals in your body to respond to some perceived danger, and it's going to happen, but you can make it better. You can, first of all, these little internal dialogues, you can do really negative ones, but you can also do positive ones. You can say to yourself, this is just a panic attack. It can't hurt me. I won't go insane. It can't make me do anything stupid. The worst that'll happen is I'm going to feel uncomfortable for a while. Then it's going to go away. I can do this. I am safe. You need to have these little phrases that you tell yourself as you're going through this attack. You kind of let the attack kind of like wash over you. Don't fight it. Allow it to happen. Keep reassuring yourself that it's okay. You're not going to die. So there's another thing you can do that some people do, which is they tense their muscles and release them and tense them and release them, and somehow that seems to help. I don't understand that one, but it does. To kind of have a long-term strategy about panic attacks, it's to try and figure out what your triggers are. Now, let's say your fear is that you don't want to be in a car. You were in a really, really bad car accident, and now you just do not want to ever get into a car again. Well, if you live in Los Angeles County, not going into a car pretty much means you're going to be homebound. I mean, how are you going to get anywhere? Not all of us live on bus lines, and not only that, but they don't go everywhere. And so, and if you're afraid of cars, you might be afraid of buses. So, this could become incredibly debilitating if you don't get over this particular fear. So, you want to actually, what your brain tells you to do is avoid that, don't get in a car, car's dangerous, accidents, don't get in a car. That's what your brain is telling you. It learned that through a bad experience. So now you have to teach your brain something different. So let's say it's the car example. So let's say on day one, you go out to the driveway and you sit down in your car, but you leave the door open. Spend a little time in there. And maybe you don't have a panic attack just because you sat in the car, so that would be a positive experience. And then you're done for that day. So maybe the next day, you're going to go sit in the car, and you're going to shut the door. You're going to sit there in the car, closed. And you'll stay there for a little while, and you don't have a panic attack, and you live. This is good. So maybe on the third day, you're going to get in the car, you're going to put your seatbelt on, and maybe you could turn over the engine. But don't go anywhere. Just stay in the driveway. So after that, you finally might want to get in the car. You might want to drive slowly, maybe around the block, and come back. Don't go very far. This is not the time to start a road trip. This is a time to just practice a few little things, exposing yourself to whatever it is that causes you to have panic attacks. And maybe if you're lucky, you can learn, retrain your brain that cars are really not life-threatening. So this is really, seriously, our brains are so complex. They do so many wonderful things, but in some ways they're just like idiots. They learn so well that they control us. And we need to take control of ourselves and help teach our brains new things. So one of the terrible things about panic attacks, and by the way, the more anxiety attacks you have, the more panic attacks you have, you are literally building neural pathways in your brain so that when something happens, your brain is lazy like we are, and it wants to just go down the easiest road. And the easiest neural pathway is the one that has been going up and down for a while, and so it becomes like more and more ingrained in you to respond to things in that particular way. So again, you need to create new neural pathways. Don't allow your brain to put you in these situations. So one of the things that panic attacks do is they dump adrenaline in your system. That is not good for you. Adrenaline is great if it's truly a scary situation and you need to run. Adrenaline will help you run faster. Adrenaline might make you not notice that your knees hurt when you run. I mean, adrenaline can do a lot of good stuff, but you don't want it all the time. That would be very bad for you. So a way to counter that is exercise. Teach your body a new healthy way of using energy. Teach your brain that you can, a way to regulate the adrenaline in your body. Running, you could be team sports, even a nice brisk walk. These are all good. As always, before you start some kind of radical exercise program, you might want to check with your doctor. If you haven't had any exercise, you've been just sitting on the couch watching TV for the last 6 years, starting an aggressive exercise might not be the smartest thing you do on day one. You might want to talk to your doctor, and you're probably going to have to start slow. But when I was doing counseling here at St. Louise, my number one prescription for people, I first would ask them, I said, do you have a dog? And they kind of look at me like I was weird. And I said, because, walking your dog is like one of the best things you can do. You just go out, you walk with the dog. It's a little boring. You might talk to your dog, just get your mind off things. You're moving. Your dog is like pulling you. So I'm a big believer in walking the dog. I think it's a great exercise. Now, if you don't have a dog, you could borrow your neighbor's, but you should ask first. Or you could just walk with a friend and talk to them while you walk. So, but I think exercise is one of the best things we can do for our body in so many different ways. So I'm now going to show you a little video. It's called 30 Seconds to Mindfulness. And this is a way in which you can handle stress.
Mindfulness. It's really become quite the buzzword in recent times, even though mindfulness practices have been used for millennia. Most of us are in agreement that mindfulness practices are a positive thing and would benefit our life. There's an abundant amount of research illustrating the positive effect that mindfulness practices have on quality of life, improved focus, and decreased stress. From Fortune 500 companies to elementary schools, mindfulness practices are being used every day in practical application and controlled studies with wonderful outcomes. Unfortunately, most of us tend to pump the brakes when we think about sequestering even a small amount of time or a quiet space to practice mindfulness. You might think to yourself, quiet space? 10 minutes? What? Forget it. I don't have time. We allow, out of survival in the moment, we allow screaming children, occupational pressures, general life stress, and technological distractions to consume our precious minutes. The result of brushing mindfulness practices aside is more stress and a decreased quality of life. What if I told you that the benefits of mindfulness could be obtained in as little as 30 seconds in almost any setting? You might think that I'm selling snake oil, or at a minimum, it's too good to be true. The reality is, it is true, and is being done regularly by people that I've trained in the method that I'm about to share with you, ranging from elite athletes to doctors to parents. I first developed the technique I call the 3x3 method when my daughter was about 1 year old. For those of you with children, you know that parenting brings about great joy, but also an incredible amount of stress. I found myself experiencing increased muscle tension, headaches, and anxiety as I rushed from home to work, to home, to the playground, to home, to bed, to work, to home, to the playground, and on the carousel went. I became extremely uncomfortable, and so I set out to do something about it. Now, as a psychotherapist working in the high-pressured environment of the Silicon Valley, I am inherently passionate about mindfulness techniques. Thought I had it in the bag. I set out to give it a try. Unfortunately, I fell right into the hurry, 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 I don't have time trap. What'd that get me? More stress, more headaches, more anxiety, the whole thing. I kept plugging along and still had very little positive result. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try and get some feedback. I started wearing a heart rate monitor to gauge my physical response to different techniques that I was trying. Kept plugging along and still was not having the type of result that I had hoped for until I paired one of the most basic breathing techniques alongside one of the most basic mindfulness techniques. That's when it clicked. That was the game changer. My heart rate began to drop consistently. My psychological responses to stressors in the environment were significantly altered. Thus, the 3x3 method was born. The 3x3 method is extremely simple. All you're going to do is identify one physical object in the environment, name it, and take one deep breath and repeat it 3 times. Now keep in mind, most everyone that I've trained in this model looked at me like I was spouting nonsense until they tried it. So you're not alone if you're feeling that same way right now, and don't worry, we're gonna do it together in just a minute, okay? You wanna do it together? Yeah. All right. So I want you to find 3 physical objects in your environment. It can be anything. It can be your desk, someone sitting next to you, your computer screen, a lamp, literally anything. It's important not to fall into a particular trap that I've seen many people fall in, and that is to add subjective descriptors to the object, like, that's my favorite stool, or I really like Johnny. When we add these subjective descriptors, adjectives, etc., it brings about subtle emotional reactions that muddle the process. So you're simply going to say, that's a stool, nothing else. And when you name the object, you're going to do so in your mind, not out loud. If you're doing this at work or on the bus or on the train, people might start to think, you're having a little trouble that day, okay? And when you take your breath, you're going to do so through your nose or your mouth, whatever's comfortable for you. Ultimately, it is best if you choose the objects yourself, but for the sake of this talk and for us to do it together and things to be expeditious, I've picked out 3 objects for us. This pointer, that stool, and this screen. Ready to give it a try together? All right, here we go. That's a pointer. Take a deep breath. That's a stool. Deep breath. That's a screen. Another deep breath. So, how do you feel? A little less stressed? A little more relaxed? It's good, right? And it's insanely simple. I even use it at night if I wake up worried about the children or work or whatever it is and I can't get back to sleep. And you better believe that I was using it behind that curtain before coming out here today. Okay? And backstage, I even did what I call a 9x9, which is doing the whole process 3 times in a row. And you can do that too if you're ever really in a tight spot or coming out to give a TEDx talk. So when are you going to use the 3x3 method in your life? We all experience repeated stressors in our daily lives that tax our ability to stay present in the current moment, focus, and manage our stress. I want you to take a moment to think about one of these repeated stressors that you experience. It shouldn't be too hard. Everyone have something? Okay. So let's make a promise to each other. The next time that we experience one of these stressors, we'll use the 3x3 method to try and manage it. Deal? Yeah. Great. So, what is the future of the 3x3 method? The people who are using the 3x3 method continue to inspire me in the myriad of situations and occupations and life settings in which they're using it. I have an elite runner using it during long races to keep stamina. A spine surgeon using it during complex procedures to stay calm. Even a CEO using it right before making big decisions. Really, anyone can use it in almost any setting. From parents to business people to doctors to athletes, it doesn't matter. Finally, the 3x3 method can be used to help us avoid the ever-growing addictive nature of the impulse to check our digital devices. The next time that you're in line at the store and you have that urge to take your phone out and check social media, send a text, read an email, don't. Use the 3x3 method instead to bring yourself back to the current moment. Every moment has meaning. Time is precious. Don't miss out. Thank you for sharing this moment with me.
Okay, so that's really simple. That's a little simple exercise that almost anybody can do at any time, any place. Obviously, the first time you do it, it probably will not really have a big impact, but as you get used to doing it and you start practicing it, I think it will have an impact on you. I loved what he said about social media. I am positive that one of the things that's driving the increasing rates of anxiety in our society today is it's almost this frantic need to be connected all the time to everything, everywhere. I actually had to remove the alerts on my phone from Facebook because I don't need to know everybody who sends, posts on Facebook. I can, once a day, twice a day, if I feel like it, look at Facebook and see if anybody's posted anything new. Most importantly, my daughter, is there a new picture of my granddaughter? But you don't have to, your phone doesn't have to constantly be, vibrating, telling you, oh, another message, and of course, all these people who post every single solitary thing they eat, I really don't need to know that either. But we seem to really, there's something really addictive about these devices, so we need to start using them intelligently. And I loved what he said about grocery stores. Next time you're in Ralph's or whatever, Stater Brothers, standing in line, look at how many people are on their devices while standing in the grocery store line. It's probably almost everybody. It's amazing. So now, this workshop was talked about spirituality, and I barely said anything about God except at the very beginning. My very best friend is a marriage and family therapist. And when I began counseling, he told me, you don't know how lucky you are to have God in your toolbox. He says most of us therapists don't have God in our toolbox to use. And in fact, I participated in a program at the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health where they have been for quite a while now and continue to do so, explore spirituality and mental health. They're absolutely convinced that spirituality is a necessary component to wellness. Wellness requires you to be well physically, mentally, and spiritually. It takes all three, or you're not in real balance. So I presume most of you are familiar with the 12-step programs like AA, and where they talk about a higher power. Now, AA is open to anybody. It can be people who believe in God, people who don't believe in God, people who believe in different kinds of gods. It doesn't matter. So they've kind of created this language talking about a higher power, which mostly for them means you're having to acknowledge that there's something greater than you and that you need to surrender to that knowledge. And the serenity prayer helped me, I don't know by heart, but it's basically, I would say, God, allow me to let go of the things that I am not in control of. And please help me have the courage to change the things that I am able to change. And the third thing is, God, help me know the difference between the things I can't change and the things that I can change. That's it in sort of paraphrased. And so this is really, that's a spiritual thing. Our AA meetings, our NA meetings, et cetera, that whole movement is very, very spiritual. Now, our biggest problem is that we kind of like get into our own head all the time. And really, we need to get out of our head. We need to just accept, just take it on faith. God loves and cares about each and every one of us. God has our back. I like to say God is crazy in love with us. I mean, it's such a deep and amazing love that there is nothing you or I could do that would separate God from us. The problem is we separate ourselves from God. God's still there, but we separate ourselves from God. You have to believe to the core, to the bottom of your feet, your life has value. I don't care how messed up you are. Your life has value. You were created by God. So your life, just on the face of it, it has value and it's important. You have to accept and believe. You will never be perfect. How much time and energy are there people out there who are trying so hard to do everything perfectly? Not going to happen. You will never be perfect. Accept that. Breathe that in. God loves me. I have value. I am never going to be perfect. Trust is the linchpin in your relationship with God. You have to learn to trust God. If you can learn to trust God, this will give you great peace of mind. If you let go and let God, that will reduce your anxiety. You're not in charge. You really, really aren't. So as long as you're not in charge, let's just let God handle anxiety and stop driving ourselves crazy. You don't have to find the solution to every problem. You actually don't have to worry about everything. So real peace of mind is living without anxiety. Now, as I said, it's impossible to live without anxiety. So everybody's going to have some anxiety, but we sure can moderate it. And I think a great way to do that is to always remind yourself that you have this thing behind you every single solitary moment that is always crazy in love with you, who accepts the way you are, as horrible as you are. God is right there. This is a good thing. If you can just really feel that, I guarantee you will be less anxious and you will be a whole lot happier. You need to develop, for part of enhancing your relationship with God, you need to have some self-confidence. So first of all, try to remember you did not create yourself. You're just part of creation. And just the fact that you exist at all means you're good and you're lovable and you're worthy of respect. And even when you make less than desirable choices, which happens to each and every one of us periodically, you are still inherently good and worthwhile. Self-esteem, self-confidence. I am good. I was created by God. God knew what God was doing. Therefore, I don't have to worry about the fact that it feels like to me that I'm a total mess. It's okay. I'm worthwhile. God loves me. I sometimes think we need to say this to ourselves all the time. We need to walk around. So when you're not on your device and you're out walking your dog, you can tell your dog, I'm loved by God. God loves me so much. I am worthy. I'm very worthy. I deserve self-respect, dog. You could tell your dog all about that and help boost your own self-confidence. I think we need to think a little bit about how does God love? Because when we think about how God loves, and if we're trying to, mimic this, we're trying to be more like God, we're trying to follow the Gospels of Jesus Christ, we're trying really, really hard, that what it will allow us to do is to give and receive unconditional God. That's how God loves. It's unconditional love, 24/7. So how can we try to mimic that? We might not do it perfectly, but can we get close? Can we really care for another without any condition? We just take them the way they are. No matter how that person looks, no matter how that person acts, you have compassion for them, you care for him or her, and you do it without any judgment. So, this is hard. It's really, really hard. People irritate us. People do really terrible things. We don't want to love them. We don't want to love them. To us, they don't appear to be very good, and we make a judgment. But that's not how God loves, and we are trying to get closer and closer to God. That's our goal as Christians. We are trying so hard to get closer to the kingdom. Each and every one of us in here, we want to be one with God someday in the kingdom. That's what each and every one of us desires. And I know we will all get there, but I suggest taking a shorter path and a longer path by start working on it now. Don't wait until after you're dead. There'll be some great consequences if you can accept God's unconditional love. Your heart will open more easily to people and their concerns. You will experience less fear and more love. You will actually feel like you have enough in this world to just get on with it. God will provide. If you can develop an intense relationship with God, you're actually going to get a lot of guidance. God will help you make decisions, and God will help you with problem solving. I remember back in the day, people would say, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And it's actually not that stupid. I mean, really, if you're trying to make a decision, you might want to think about, well, what would Jesus do? And that might help you. I think God does give us clues in life. Certainly, I think the Gospels do. We can look to the Gospels, we can read Scripture, and that can help us make everyday decisions. Today, God embraced the little child. I don't know about your children, but there were periods of time when I did not really want to embrace my child. So I could have remembered that little piece of Scripture that was like a little guidance from God. No, embrace this child and love this child. God's wisdom is greater than your own. So one of the practices you can do is just ask God for help. It's always been my great disappointment that God never seems to answer anything very clearly. I do better with written instructions. So it would be really nice, if I got up in the morning and God had left on the end of my bed a whole list of things that I should do and not do that day. That would be very, very helpful. Hasn't happened yet. But it never stops me from asking God for help. So ask God for help. Believe that God's wisdom is there and that you have access to it. So I now have a little video that has to do with happiness. And it gives some advice on what you can do to help yourself. This thing was called The Happy Secret to Better Work.
When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5 years old, we were playing on top of a bunk bed. I was 2 years older than my sister at the time. I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story. Which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side, and somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off of the top of the bunk bed and landed with this crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister, and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet, for which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's face this wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now that was cheating, because there's nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy the hurt 5-year-old little sister, but Amy the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past, and you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict, as her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain and suffering surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. What we stumbled across at this tender age of just 5 and 7, we had no idea at the time, was something that was going to be at the vanguard of a scientific revolution occurring 2 decades later in the way that we look at the human brain. What we had stumbled across is something called positive psychology, which is the reason that I'm here today and the reason that I wake up every morning. When I first started talking about this research outside of academia, out with companies and schools, the very first thing they said to never do is to start your talk with a graph. The very first thing I wanted to do is start my talk with a graph. This graph looks boring, but this graph is the reason that I get excited and wake up every morning. And this graph doesn't even mean anything. It's fake data. What we found is if I got this data back studying you here in the room, I would be thrilled, because there's very clearly a trend that's going on there, and that means that I can get published, which is all that really matters. The fact that there's one weird red dot that's up above the curve, there's one weird in the room, you know who you are, I saw you earlier. That's no problem. That's no problem, as most of you know, because I can just delete that dot. I can delete that dot because that's clearly a measurement error, and we know that's a measurement error because it's messing up my data. So one of the very first things that we teach people in economics and statistics and business and psychology courses is how, in a statistically valid way, do we eliminate the weirdos? How do we eliminate the outliers? So that we can find the line of best fit, which is fantastic if I'm trying to find out how many Advil the average person should be taking, too. But if I'm interested in potential, if I'm interested in your potential, or for happiness, or productivity, or energy, or creativity, what we're doing is we're creating the cult of the average with science. If I ask a question like, how fast can a child learn how to read in a classroom? Scientists change the answer to, how fast does the average child learn how to read in that classroom? And then we tailor the class right towards the average. Now, if you fall below the average on this curve, then psychologists get thrilled, because that means you're either depressed, or you have a disorder, or hopefully both. We're hoping for both, because our business model is if you come into a therapy session with one problem, we want to make sure you leave knowing you have 10. So you'll keep coming back over and over again. We'll go back into your childhood if necessary, but eventually what we want to do is to make you normal again. But normal is merely average. And what I posit, and what positive psychology posits, is that if we study what is merely average, we will remain merely average. Then instead of deleting those positive outliers, what I intentionally do is come into a population like this one and says, why? Why is it that some of you are so high above the curve in terms of your intellectual ability, athletic ability, musical ability, creativity, energy levels, your resiliency in the face of challenge, your sense of humor? Whatever it is, instead of deleting you, what I want to do is study you. Because maybe we can glean information, not just how to move people up to the average, but how we can move the entire average up. at our companies and schools worldwide. The reason this graph is important to me is when I turn on the news, it seems like the majority of the information is not positive. In fact, it's negative. Most of it's about murder, corruption, diseases, natural disasters, and very quickly, my brain starts to think that's the accurate ratio of negative to positive in the world. What that's doing is creating something called the medical school syndrome, which if you know people who have been to medical school during the first year of medical training, as you read through a list of all the symptoms and diseases that could happen, suddenly you realize you have all of them. I have a brother-in-law named Bobo, which is a whole other story. Bobo married Amy the unicorn. Bobo called me on the phone from Yale Medical School. And Bobo said, "Sean, I have leprosy." Which even at Yale is extraordinarily rare. But I had no idea how to console poor Bobo because he had just gotten over an entire week of menopause. See, what we're finding is not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. And if we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. When I applied to Harvard, I applied on a dare. I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later that allowed me to go, suddenly something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to. Wasn't that guy. But what happened? I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years, and what I found in my research and my teaching is that these students, no matter how happy they were with the original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later, their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brain was focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up, I know some of you have heard of it. When they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something out of Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness. Because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels. When in reality, if I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality. What we found is that only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. I talked to a boarding school up in New England, probably the most prestigious boarding school, and they said, we already know that. So every year, instead of just teaching our students, we also have a wellness week, and we're so excited. Monday night, we have the world's leading expert coming in to speak about adolescent depression. Tuesday night is school violence and bullying. Wednesday night's eating disorders. Thursday night is illicit drug use. And Friday night, we're trying to decide between risky sex or happiness. I said that's most people's Friday nights. Which I'm glad you liked, but they did not like that at all. Silence on the phone. And into the silence, I said, I'd be happy to speak at your school, but just so you know, that's not a wellness week, that's a sickness week. What you've done is you've outlined all the negative things that can happen, but not talked about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is, it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stressed, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we need to be able to do is to reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has two functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all of the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We've found that there are ways that you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day. And at the end of that, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about one positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain that your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once, and allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people, when they open up their inbox, to write one positive email praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities and by training your brain, just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success, and in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much.
So I just wrote out what the 30 seconds to mindfulness, the 3x3 method, and I wrote out those steps to happiness. And so I think that this is something you want to take home, and I think these are things you might want to practice. And I think it will really help you. And I think it will really helpful if you are in this moment in a really stressful situation. I think for me personally, the 3 gratitudes is so important to give to every single day. Note a couple things that you're very grateful for, and they can be really small things. They can be the rose in the front yard was really pretty today. I mean, they don't have to be big things. But you'll become aware of it. You'll become aware of all the good stuff that goes on in your life that, frankly, it gets drowned out by the difficult things in our lives. So I really do. I suggest that you practice these things. So I'm going to do a closing prayer. And then if you want, we could then have discussion. Does that sound fair? Okay. This, again, is the Be Exalted song, the same song we heard in the front in the beginning, but this is with the children's choir in Africa.
Be exalted, O Lord, our God. Be exalted, O Lord, our God. Oh yes, you reign. Lift you up.
So it's sort of a different take on that same song. But boy, if those aren't glorifying God, I don't know what does. Okay, so any questions, comments, sharing? Yes.
I'm Nancy, and you know me, Sister Nancy, and I loved the presentation. It was very inspirational. I got a lot of, I thought it was going to just be ordinary, just boring or whatever.
No, like I usually am.
But it had a lot of spice in it, and I felt like I got some more strategies to work with. And I invited my son, and he chose not to come. And that's his choice. But, you know, he needed it more than I did. So, yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
I feel I learned more strategies to help myself.
Yeah, I think the strategies are, that's the goal, that we all figure out strategies on how to make ourselves better, remembering that when we make ourselves better, that really is going to help our faith life as well. Well, I did know, oh, go ahead.
You know, how can someone distinguish between, like whether they just have, anxiety or someone actually is like an anxiety disorder or medication?
Well, you can't really, it has to do with frequency, the duration of the episodes, the intensity of the episodes, and then the context of the episodes. So for example, if you, let's say it's your kid, your teenager, and they seem to like just continuously be so anxious about everything that's going on around them. And as time goes by, this anxiety that they feel, it really seems to be starting to cripple them. They aren't able to do whatever it is that they need to do. And there doesn't seem to be any real reason why they should be feeling they're getting, the grades are okay, they have friends, you can't really figure out why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And that, and the episodes keep lasting longer and longer and longer, that they're having more periods of time where they can't get over it. Well, that would be very clear. That kid needs to see a doctor. Trying to remember that anxiety is normal. And I think there's a problem in our society today that and I get it, let me tell you, I totally get it. We want to be pain-free. We want to be anxiety-free. We just want to feel good. Unfortunately, that's not the human condition. The human condition is we hurt, especially when we get older, and we're going to be anxious about stuff that needs to be done, especially the things that we didn't do and we needed to do. And all of that's normal and it's okay. We don't have to take pills for every single solitary thing that happens, and that's what our tendency is to go get a pill to numb us, to numb all our feelings. So, but when you're trying to figure out, like with a person you love, whether this is something extreme or is this something normal, I really think you would be looking at how often is this happening. I mean, if this is a child who is just constantly so worried they can't get anything done, well, then you got a problem. But if it's like, oh my God, my hair looks terrible and I just can't go out today because, that's normal. I mean, you just got to kind of look at the situation of what's going on with your kid.
What about someone who has a lot of fears? Because I think it's anxiety for like someone, let's say like they're afraid to drive because they're afraid to drive because like their dad died in a car crash and he was driving. So they automatically think every time they're going to drive.
That person needs help. That person needs help. Because see, that's affecting their daily life.
They can get in the car, but they just can't drive because they imagine that they're going to get into a car crash or something.
Right, so that's affecting their ability to function. And as soon as you're dealing with an inability to function, like when your kid absolutely can't go to school, when somebody can't go somewhere in a car or drive in a car, when somebody has to keep changing their route when they walk in the neighborhood because the dog in somebody's yard who's chained up and behind a fence, they can't walk past it. This is like too much. It's too much. It's affecting their daily life. They need to see a doctor. And they may need medication, and maybe what they just need is good therapy and coping strategies, good strategies for dealing with it.
Some articles I've read talk about how anxiety, depression are tools that the enemy uses to wear us down.
You're talking about the devil enemy.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. Can you address that?
Well, I think if I were Satan, I would look for every tool I could find because I want to win. But having depression and anxiety has nothing to do with Satan. It has to do with your brain. And Satan didn't create you. God did. So it's a good brain. It's valuable. You just need to help yourself control it. So yeah, I believe that Satan would probably try to use anything that Satan can figure out how to use to separate you from your relationship with God. But you know, we were created by God, and we were created pretty good, and we can fight those impulses, but sometimes we need help. And maybe that help is going to be medical, not necessarily talking to a priest. Spiritual help may help, but I would highly suggest that it be a two-point prong: spiritual help, medical help.
So do you have any saints or anyone, prayers?
Okay.
Or any special ones that might help?
I don't know if there's any special ones that are specific to anxiety or fear, but I have two prayers there in the back that you can pick up.
Okay.
One is a novena to the woman who founded my order, St. Julie Billiard, St. Julie. And so there's a novena to her to help you just get through daily life. And then there's a new prayer, a new card that we just put out, that's a prayer to Mary. And it's also an asking for help prayer.
Sister, in that context, the thing that we're encouraged to do is like an examination of conscience at the end of the day. Where have I found God today? What do I have to be thankful for? What has happened in my life today that I can improve upon tomorrow? Just to along the lines of what you described, is a way to put it in a spiritual context.
Yes, and in fact, the examining of conscience, in my opinion, is pretty close to the guy's happiness thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much what he said to do. We just have done it in a Jesuit kind of way.
Correct.
And he's done it in a psychologist kind of way. So yeah, that's the prayer I say every single night before I go to bed, is the examining of conscience. And I do it in the way, just like the way you described it. Where did I find God today? Where did I notice God in my life today? Again, can be really simple things. It could be that pretty rose in the front yard. It could be witnessing an incredible act of kindness by another person on the street. It can be anything, but where did you find God today? Another question is, where did I not find God? Which usually means that you've resisted God in some way, but God was really absent today in such and such a situation. What do I want to do tomorrow to do better? How can I improve this relationship with God tomorrow? And so asking yourself these questions before you go to sleep might help you sleep, because you won't be worrying about those things. And you might feel good because you did meet God that day. So.
How can I help a woman that's, she's in her 80s, she is taking anxiety medication, but suddenly she read the side effects that said that you can have suicidal thoughts. So now she refuses to take it, and I could just see her health deteriorate.
Okay, well, all medicine has lots and lots and lots of side effects. There is no doubt about it. So I guess my question would be to her, well, were you having suicidal thoughts? And if you start having funny thoughts, would you talk to me about it? Not necessarily stop taking the medication or not taking the medication, but let's be proactive to make sure these bad things don't happen that are on the side effect, or one of the side effects of pills. That's what I would say to her. And and if you want, every day I'll ask you, are you thinking about suicide today? and suicide is a subject that we should never duck. We should never be afraid to talk to people about suicide. There are some people who are afraid that if they mention the word suicide, that might convince somebody to commit suicide, especially when you're working with kids, teens. That is not true. The best thing you can do, if your kid seems really depressed, you should ask them, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? Which will really freak them out. And hopefully they say no. And if they actually said, well, I actually have I've been thinking about how maybe it would be better in this world if I weren't around. And then you have a whole series of other questions. I ask them, oh, well, have you thought about a plan about how you would do it? And if they say yes, then we're in mega danger territory. And we need to get immediate help. And then I would say you don't leave your child's side until you can get help, called the suicide hotline or whatever it is that you're going to do. But we should never be afraid to talk about suicide. because we probably could prevent some suicides if somebody had actually talked to somebody about it beforehand. Because they didn't like just do it on a whim. It's not like they woke up one morning and said, today I'm going to commit my suicide. No, they've been thinking about it. And they've been trying really, really hard to hide the fact that they've been thinking about it. So I thank you all for coming.